Mythological creatures are beings that inhabit the imagination of various cultures around the world. They are part of myths, legends, and narratives that have been passed down from generation to generation. Often, these entities have supernatural characteristics, such as the ability to fly, the ability to transform themselves, or magical powers that defy the natural laws that we know. However, it is interesting to note that, despite their fantastical qualities, these creatures often reflect aspects of reality, whether they are based on real animals or on natural phenomena that our ancestors could not explain. When I talk about mythological creatures, I remember how, as a child, it was fascinating to hear stories about fairies, dragons, and mermaids. Each of these narratives brought with it a moral, a lesson that went beyond mere fantasy. These stories have always made me reflect on what is real and what is imaginary, and how the two worlds can intertwine in surprising ways. These creatures are not just products of the imagination, they serve a deeper purpose. They are instruments that cultures use to transmit values, traditions, and collective experiences. Throughout history, humanity has always sought to understand the unknown, and stories of mythological beings have often emerged as attempts to explain natural phenomena or inexplicable events. For example, how can a storm be interpreted as the wrath of a god or the presence of a sea monster? In addition, many of these creatures have their roots in realities that have been distorted over time. Imagine that, in ancient times, a traveler came across an unknown animal, and in his description, exaggerated its characteristics. This story, when told and retold, could easily transform a simple animal into an extraordinary creature, such as a dragon or a chimera. Thus, legends feed on reality, shaping themselves over the centuries. The presence of mythological creatures in cultures is as vast as human traditions themselves. Every civilization, from the ancient Egyptians to the Norse, has its own stories and beings that reflect its values and fears. For example, the Minotaur of ancient Greece symbolizes fear of the unknown, while the phoenix represents resilience and the ability to rise from the ashes. These stories have a special power because they speak directly to the human heart, connecting us to universal experiences such as love, fear, courage, and the struggle between good and evil. In short, mythological creatures are much more than just fairy tale figurines. They represent the human search for meaning and understanding in an often chaotic and inexplicable world. By reflecting on these stories, we are invited to explore not only what these creatures represent, but also what they tell us about ourselves and our own journey. Therefore, when we hear or read about these fascinating entities, we should remember that behind every myth there is a truth, a lesson, and a connection to our past and present. When we talk about mythological creatures, it is fascinating to think that many of these stories may have originated from observations of real animals. The idea that legends and myths might have some basis in something tangible is intriguing and makes us wonder what really lies behind these fascinating narratives. Throughout history, humanity has always had a need to explain the unknown, and this has often manifested itself in the form of extraordinary beings. Imagine that in ancient times, people did not have the same understanding of the natural world that we have today. They saw large fossilized bones and, without the necessary scientific knowledge, could easily believe that they were the remains of legendary creatures. For example, the discovery of large fossils in remote regions could have led to the creation of stories about giants that inhabited the earth. Furthermore, many animals that we today take for granted may have been seen in a completely different way in the past. Think of elephants, which have long trunks and large tusks. For someone who had never seen one of these animals, the sight of an elephant could easily be transformed into a story of a colossal monster. This ability to exaggerate features and transform them into mythical creatures is an almost artistic ability of the human imagination. A clear example of this is the dragon. The idea of a winged being, breathing fire and terrorizing villages, may have arisen from the observation of large reptiles. Imagine a group of people seeing a large crocodile, or even one of the impressive dinosaurs that inhabited the earth. Over time, the memory of these animals could have become distorted, resulting in stories of majestic and fearsome dragons. It is interesting to think that, at some point, These relics' tales may have been told around a campfire, terrifying and fascinating listeners. Another example is unicorns. Many people believe that this magical creature, with a single horn on its forehead, may have been inspired by rhinos. These animals, which have an imposing horn, could have given rise to the idea of magical beings that were, in fact, just exaggerated versions of something that already existed. The human need to believe in something extraordinary is a powerful force that has shaped many of our narratives. It is essential to remember that the line between reality and fantasy is often blurred. The stories we tell are reflections of our experiences and perceptions. For many, these creatures are not just legends, but representations of the fears, hopes, and aspirations of an era. By exploring these mythologies, we are not only looking back into the past, but also understanding the values and beliefs that shaped entire societies. So when we think about mythological creatures, it is fascinating to consider not only what they represent, but where they may have come from. The real basis of these stories connects us with humanity from time immemorial, showing that, even in a world full of mysteries, there is always a thread of truth to be found. It is worth remembering that these narratives continue to inspire us and make us dream, keeping the magic of human imagination alive. When we talk about mythological creatures, it is fascinating to explore some specific examples that have captured the imagination of different cultures over the centuries. Among them, dragons and unicorns stand out, both for the beauty of their stories and for the possibility of having roots in reality. Starting with dragons, these gigantic and imposing creatures are often described as winged reptiles, capable of breathing fire. Throughout history, many civilizations, such as the Chinese and European, have developed their own versions of this being. In Chinese culture, dragons are seen as symbols of power and wisdom, while in Western tradition, they are often portrayed as evil creatures to be defeated by heroes. The origin of dragons may be linked to large reptiles that existed in ancient times. It is interesting to note that the discovery of dinosaur fossils may have generated stories about these fantastic creatures. Imagine a group of people, thousands of years ago, finding enormous bones and not knowing how to explain it. Human imagination, always so creative, may have transformed those discoveries into legends of terrifying flying dragons. In this way, reality and fantasy intertwine, creating a legacy that endures to this day. Now let's talk about unicorns, magical beings that represent purity and beauty. The most common image we have of them is that of a white horse with a spiral horn on its forehead. It is believed that the idea of the unicorn may have arisen from the observation of real animals, such as the rhinoceros. Imagine the scene. A European traveler, upon seeing a rhinoceros for the first time, may have let his imagination run wild, transforming this animal into a mystical being with healing powers and unparalleled beauty. These examples of mythological creatures show us how nature and human imagination can come together to create stories that transcend time. It is as if the human mind has an intrinsic desire to bring to life what cannot be directly explained, to transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. In many cases, what was once seen as real and tangible becomes fantastical through narrative and symbolism. Furthermore, stories about dragons and unicorns allow us to reflect on our own hopes and fears. Dragons, for example, can represent immense challenges that we have to face in our lives. Unicorns, on the other hand, can symbolize love, purity, and the search for something higher. These creatures are not just fantasies, they reflect our own experiences and emotions. It is interesting to note how these figures still have an impact on popular culture. Today, we can see dragons and unicorns in films, books, and even in video games. They continue to enchant new generations, showing that these stories have an enduring power in the human imagination. The beauty of these mythological creatures ultimately lies in their ability to connect us with something greater, something that goes beyond what we can see and touch. Through these stories, we are taken to a world where reality and fantasy collide, reminding us that sometimes truth can be as magical as fiction. When we think of dinosaurs, we often think of images of gigantic creatures that ruled the earth millions of years ago. It is fascinating to imagine how these beings could have influenced the legends and myths we know today. The connection between paleontological discoveries and stories of creatures, mythical remains, seem to be more than just a coincidence. The presence of dinosaur fossils in various regions of the world may have been one of the factors that inspired ancient narratives about colossal beasts. When a group of people finds the remains of a large dinosaur, the first reaction may be one of amazement and fear. After all, the idea that such a creature once walked the earth is intriguing, to say the least. Many ancient cultures did not have the knowledge we have today about paleontology. For them, a giant bone could easily be interpreted as part of a dragon or a mythical monster. Imagination combined with the unknown creates fertile ground for these stories to proliferate and become legends. A clear example of this phenomenon is the way some cultures interpreted dinosaur fossils. In ancient China, for example, the bones of large creatures were often associated with dragons, which were seen as symbols of power and strength. In Greece, the discovery of fossils of large animals may have contributed to the creation of myths about titans and sea monsters. This relationship between reality and mythology reveals a lot about how societies tried to understand the world around them. I remember reading about the discovery of a fossil of a huge dinosaur in South America. Scientists described how the local community responded with stories about a monster that inhabited the region. It's amazing how the human imagination can create narratives around the unknown. For these communities, what was once a simple fossil became a legend that could be told around the campfire, passed down from generation to generation. Furthermore, dinosaurs were not just terrifying creatures. Some were giant herbivores, such as the Brontosaurus, which could have inspired stories about benevolent giants that walked the earth, helping plants to grow. This contrast between terror and benevolence also shaped how the creatures were perceived in narratives. The same is true for indigenous cultures in North America, where local fauna, including large mammals and reptiles, could have influenced their stories and myths. Throughout history, images of dinosaurs and their fossils have led us to reflect on what is real and what is imaginary. This fine line between truth and fantasy is what makes stories about mythical creatures so fascinating. They invite us to explore not only what once existed, but also what may still exist in our imagination. Therefore, when we consider how dinosaurs and their fossils have influenced mythology, we are reminded that behind every legend, there may be a fragment of truth. These narratives continue to connect us with our roots and with the human spirit itself, which seeks to understand the vastness of the world through stories that transcend time. It is a dance between past and present, where reality and imagination intertwine in a magical way. Scientific research has advanced greatly, and through paleontology, we have been able to understand more about these extinct species. However, the magic lies in the way these creatures continue to inhabit our collective imagination. They represent not only a connection to the past, but also the human capacity to tell stories, to give life to beings that reflect our fears and desires. When I come across the image of a mammoth or a saber-toothed tiger, it is as if I am talking to a part of our history, with an echo of a time that has already passed. The narratives that emerged from these extinct creatures also speak of the struggle for survival, of adaptation and resistance. In many cultures, these animals were seen as symbols of strength and courage, and it is natural that, over time, these stories have become legends that have been passed down from generation to generation. Therefore, when we talk about extinct animals that fueled stories of monsters, we are also addressing what unites us as human beings. Our stories, our legends, are reflections of our experiences and of everything that has impacted us over time. And perhaps by revisiting these tales, we may find not only a fascination with mythical creatures, but also a way to better understand ourselves and our place in the world.